All right, creative prompts inspired by Robert Heinleins and He Built a Crooked House in the book Where Do We Go From Here, edited by Isaac Asimov. And the creative prompts inspired by this are 6, like I usually do. I thought about, for a very brief second, I thought about doing 8, because that's how many cubes are used in making a tesseract. But I'm not going to do that. Not going to change the pattern, something that just a one-off this time. I might do it in the future for something else. But starting with idea number 1. A salesman with a tesseract suitcase. I feel like doing a story where you have a door-to-door salesman, like an old, what is it, the Miller's Brushman or whatever it is, who goes door-to-door selling different things. Having a sort of alien, whatever, door-to-door salesman walking around with a case of goods for sale, and the case is as big as the interior of a cargo hold on a hauler truck, full of strange and interesting science fiction devices, gizmos, gadgets, and doohickeys. And it's, I mean, that's not a bad name, honestly. Like, this is Cosmic Wonders, Gizmos, Gadgets, and Doohickeys. Galactic Items and Emporium or whatever, I don't know. Something to that effect, where it's a door-to-door salesman who really doesn't get the fact that he's entered a realm, a world full of people who are not technologically or sociologically prepared for the wonders and amazements that he has in his briefcase. That would be just like a fun, interesting story to do. Number 2 is basing off of one of the aspects of this this story that really departs from the plausible. The part of the story where they talk about how he has the building's built in Northern California, but when they look out the window, they're looking out over the skyline of New York City. Like, they've clearly built a building where the exterior surfaces aren't anchored anywhere in space-time that we would expect. And as much as that doesn't fit with just making a simple hypercube arrangement, it does have possibility for something like that happening, where, for whatever reason, an architect or a mad scientist or whatever, say in a superhero setting or like an urban fantasy setting, you have somebody who either intentionally or accidentally assembles a building that shouldn't be possible but does, and it sets it up as like the central headquarters of their private investigation office or their package delivery service or whatever. And different faces of the building or different doors of the building open to a central building that you can go into. But the doors that open outward open on different cities around the world. And so instead of going like there's a different branch in each city, there's just one, but it's in multiple cities. And so you could be a field agent for the organization in this building, and your territory could be a whole region of the country or the world. And when you go back in to check in the home office, You drive up to where the door is located, you enter that building, and if you exit through a different door, you're in a different region of the world. And maybe there's a door in the basement that shows up on the moon or Mars, and you don't know that until you explore further. Okay, so that's idea number 2. Idea number 3. The idea that this happened because the building was built and then an earthquake shook it and it collapsed into a different dimensional space because of an earthquake. It proposes the idea that, like, is it possible that some natural structures have had that happen at some point? So like a cave that has the actual cave part of it collapsed into the 4th dimension. So are there literally caves that when you look at the space that they're occupying look like it's just a hole in the side of a boulder, but when you walk into the boulder is a massive internal cavern that fills up space it shouldn't be able to fill up? And if there's spaces like that, perhaps throughout all of history, these cave-ins have been happening, and there are all these hidden little 4th dimensional pockets that you can occupy and use. Sounds like an interesting idea to me. Number 4. Could you do something like those 4th dimensional pockets where you use a book where when you open to a certain page, it's a pocket into the 4th dimension that's a whole nother room. A room that's either a vault, a safe, or more interesting to me, like a stage set where like somebody figured out how to make these 4th dimensional pockets, and so they built fictional book settings like prop designs, costumes, staging sets, everything you would need to do to have a certain scene from a book. But when you open the book, it looks like a picture book showing that scene, but it's actually a pocket that you can climb into and interact with that scene. I don't know. I'm not sure where to go with that story. There's an element in there maybe worth telling. I mean, honestly, I think that's just something I want. I want a book that you can carry around with you that has scenes and setups. Like, I think it would be fun to have a book like this where you open it up and different chapters have, say, a jewelry making workshop that you can climb into and work on the inside, and all you need is just that one book. But number 5, I think we're at right now, right? If you're going to do something like that with a book, I feel like the mad scientist in me says a multi-tool where you pull out what looks like a Swiss Army knife or one of those plier tools, and it holds things it shouldn't, on any reasonable expectation, ever be able to hold. You just pull out a chainsaw off of your pocket knife, and it works. Like, if it were possible to build extra space inside of things with 4th dimensional geometry, I can't imagine anything more I'd like to do than make a pocket tool that could literally do everything. Well, I would do other things too with it, but that's definitely like one of the first things. Like, of course, a thing that lets me do anything I want to do at any given time. Yeah. And then number 6. A superhero with the ability to create multi-dimensional spaces. And I think to some degree, like something like this has happened, and it has to have happened somewhere in science fiction and fantasy somewhere. But the possibility of a character who has the ability to turn any opening door into a given room. And I can't tell you whether or not it makes more sense to make it so that it's a tesseract, so that depending on which direction they're going through the door frame, it'll access a different room inside the tesseract space that they create. I think that's a good limit to set on it. Because there's a tendency to, like, if I go to any door, I open it and I get to decide what room it opens up into. That's less interesting than if I go to this door and I open it from this side with the intent that when I open it, it'll access the tesseract space. Going through it east to west gets you one of the rooms in it. Going west to east gets you the other side. Opening up a trapdoor in the floor and going down, that can access the top surface. And going down into a trapdoor before you're doing it, closing the door and then opening the door upwards gets you into the bottom one. North to south, south to north, gets you different doors. The biggest problem I see with this design is you've got 6 of those squares. How do you gain access to the other 2? Because you have 2 other directions to go in. You're going up, down, left, right, forward, back. You've got the blue and the red directional spaces. I mean, technically, they're all blue and red directionally. And again, this may be a matter of tweaking the concept that Heinlein made to be a little more accurate with the geometry, where most of us can't perceive past 3 dimensions. When we start to be able to visualize the 4th dimensional shift on things, you're going to have 2 worlds overlaid on top of each other. But we still can't walk in a blue-red direction. And maybe that's the difference between this character. Maybe that's their power. And at that point, it's not a, which direction are you going through the doorway necessarily. Maybe they have to walk in a certain direction through a frame that they've set their power to radiate in order to help trigger their subconscious to access a given direction. But directionally, from that point of view, how do you access that central pair of cubes, the cubes that make up the 7th and 8th cubic face of the tesseract? I'm sure geometrically that's very confusing if you're not familiar with 4th dimensional geometry. But I kind of like the idea of the rooms always being a single entrance exit room, sort of like a storage space. But visually, how do you access all 8 faces? I do like the idea of going left or right through a doorway, making the difference of which one of those faces you access. That still only gets you the 6 directions out of 8 that you can pull off. I'll have to think about that, but I do want to do that in a story at some point. So, sorry, long pauses are not intentional on that one. I'm just really thinking about it. So these are the story ideas that I came up with, inspired by this story, and you can tell that I really got into this concept very much. Hopefully, somebody out there also finds some of these ideas interesting and they help prompt you to create something interesting. And if you do, please share it. But until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night.